What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be talking about the current state of combat. Obviously with the recent combat update that happened, combat is in a much better place than it was prior to this update. Obviously after Necromancy came out, I think the period of time between Necromancy and the combat update was a pretty bad state for combat to be in. So I'm definitely pretty, happy that combat has been updated and is in a much better state currently. But today I'm going to be talking about kind of, I guess my thoughts about the current state of combat, some of the good, some of the bad, and a little bit of discussion to, bring to you guys to see what you guys think about this. But as for the background footage of this video, I don't really know what I'm going to put in here. It probably just like some random filler, combat footage, I guess. But yeah, so to start things off, I am going to be talking about some of the good things about combat in the current state. So the first thing that I want to talk about is going to be range and melee. I think range and melee are in a relatively decent state. I mean, they're not perfect, obviously, but I think as far as their competitiveness with Necromancy, I think they're in a pretty solid state. Right? Like range requires more effort, but the damage you can pump out with range is absolutely ridiculous. If you've seen my Zamrock 500% damage nuke video, I mean, you can just absolutely destroy pretty much anything that you see with range if you know what you're doing. So I think that's definitely pretty cool. And I think melee is pretty similar. If you know what you're doing, you can absolutely just destroy everything, right? Like it has the potential to just burst out obscene amounts of damage. And I think that's pretty good for the game. There are definitely some downsides to that though. And I think it's the effort that it takes to do this compared to Necromancy. And with melee specifically, I think it potentially could be the berserk damage. I'm not entirely sure what other people think about this. And honestly, I would kind of like to get some people's opinions about kind of what they feel about the berserk damage that you take. Because to me, it doesn't really matter, but I feel like to a lot of people, it may be really annoying to be taking just this crazy amount of excess damage. So I definitely want to know what other people think about the berserk damage. But yeah, back to the effort thing. I think the effort that it takes to compare to Necromancy is still a little bit off, and I might make a whole new video about this, but I think it comes down mainly to two things. One is the fact that special attacks and EOF special attacks cannot be cast with Revolution. I think that's part of the problem. And then I think the other part of the problem is your EOFs. You have to switch your EOF item in order to be gaining access to the other special attacks. And I know this is an obvious thing, but I think it's actually kind of detrimental to the game to have 3 EOFs for range and 3 or 2 EOFs for melee. I honestly think that's kind of detrimental to the game because obviously they're trying to make the game more accessible to more players. And I think the fact that you need all these switches and stuff for every style that's not Necromancy, again, is just detrimental to the game considering that's the direction they want to go. And obviously if you're good at the game or you don't mind putting in a lot of effort, it doesn't really matter to you. But I don't think that's where the game is headed, to be honest with you. I think they're trying to make it easier for the majority of people. And I definitely see that holding combat back, especially, melee and range. I definitely see, these multiple EOF special attacks and stuff like that really holding these styles back, especially when you compare them to Necromancy. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure exactly how I feel about this, to be honest, because on one hand, I can do all these things. I'm a pretty decent player. I'm definitely not the best player or whatever, but I'm pretty decent and I can pull off the gear switches and stuff. And I definitely see the value in having higher effort be rewarded with higher DPS. But on the other hand, I also make guides for people who, do low effort methods. And, some of these combat styles revolving around these gear switches and stuff that, most of these low effort players are never going to do, is hindering those combat styles so much that those players probably will never use those combat styles. So, I'm not 100% sure on how to solve this problem, to be honest, but I definitely see there being a slight issue with that, and there may be some middle ground with like maybe revocable special attacks, or maybe putting multiple different, special attacks into a single EOF, and then you could just have like EOF spec 1 on keybind 1, EOF spec 2 on keybind 2, but it would all be in one EOF. I definitely feel like there is a better way to do this, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I'd like to know what other people think about that. And, if you'd want to see a whole video about me talking about, changing EOFs and special attacks in general, because I think it is a whole topic for another video. So next up, the good things I think with combat are going to be necromancy. So obviously, necromancy came out in a state that was a little busted, to say the least. I mean, with the ramping damage of death skulls and the crazy critical strikes you could hit, and like all the other like stuff, and then also the conjures being just a complete disaster to try to summon in combat because they took like 100% adrenaline. I think the changes to necromancy have really brought it into a relatively decent state, where it's not ridiculously OP. It's still pretty OP, okay, but it's not ridiculously OP, and it's also designed a lot better. So I definitely feel like necromancy is in a state currently where it feels a lot better to use than it originally did. And I think it's definitely a good thing that the devs at least listened to the community, figured out the problems, and then solved those problems. And because of that, necromancy is in a pretty decent state in my opinion. So I kind of already went over this, but I think another really good thing about combat currently is that, there are ways for higher amounts of effort and higher amounts of skill and stuff like that to be rewarded. But like I said, there are definitely some issues I see with that as well. But some of the things that I think are really good about this more effort equals more reward type things are like split soul with the Eldritch crossbow spec. You can like perfectly optimize your prayer switching with soul split, and like rotations and stuff with range, to really be getting some like pretty decent output. And if you have more knowledge and you put in a little bit more effort, and you will definitely be rewarded highly. I'm sure if you've seen my Raksha video, you can put in a lot of effort and get some pretty ridiculous skills. And even that video, like that Raksha method that I had, it may have like been a 130 peak kill time. You can even go even faster than that, but I mean that requires like one switching and stuff. But yeah, like I said, there's definitely some really good stuff with the higher amounts of effort being rewarded, but I also see a bit of some problems with that. So those are really, I think, the best things about the current state of combat. And now I kind of want to go into some of the things that I really don't think are good. And the first thing I'm going to talk about, put it on your bingo card. What's it going to be? If you had FSOA nerf, you're right. You got all of them in a line, and now you win 3 GP. But anyway, yeah, the FSOA nerf, this current state of the fractured staff, I think is so unbelievably bad that it's really just like a straight, it just feels bad, man. Like, it's so bad. And unfortunately for the fractured staff, I don't really know how you fix this weapon without reverting it to at least some form of its previous form. I really don't know how you fix the issues that the current FSOA has without reverting to auto attacks. And if you don't know what I mean, basically this is kind of the rundown of the fractured staff. So before they nerfed the fractured staff, it had the problem of potentially, like theoretically, doing infinite damage up until the point where the staff spec ended, which means the damage wasn't actually infinite, but it had the potential to hit an exponential curve in damage where, one critical strike would turn into another, which would turn into more and more and more. And because you were continuously hitting more attacks that would generate more critical strikes, you would eventually be hitting this exponential curve and be getting obscene amounts of damage. But that only really happened with 100% critical strike chance. So it really wasn't that feasible. And you didn't really start noticing that issue until about 55% critical strike chance or higher. Which we were really nowhere close to. I think we're at like 43% at the time of the nerf, and we still are today. So, but yeah, And then the other issue with the FSOA was the blood barrage healing. The blood barrage healing, you know, it was a little ridiculous. You would FSOA spec switch to blood barrage and then basically be in God mode where you'd heal to full HP in like 1 second after every piece of damage you took. It was a little excessive, you know, like it was a little bit too much healing. But I think what they did to the staff, like, took it from being in that state where theoretically it could be like really OP. They took it from that form and they just ruined it. And it is so bad in its current state that I really don't know how you fix this weapon. I mean, I could maybe see some dual wield set effects that you could do to make it better, and like maybe an armor set effect. But even then, like, those set effects, I don't really think are good enough. And what I'm talking about here, because most people maybe don't know, you know, they're not in my head, so how would they know? But what I'm talking about here is if a dual wield set had the ability to cast 2 different spells at once, and then also had a passive effect to be gaining effects from, you know, maybe the offhand spell, you could maybe make a situation where your main hand is casting Exsanguinate and your offhand is casting Blood Barrage. So then you could be getting your 12% damage bonus from Exsanguinate and then healing from Blood Barrage. But currently, the way that the staff is designed, you are forced to use Exsanguinate, and every other spell in the game is completely unusable except for the occasional switch to Insight Fear to get the critical strike or the adrenaline reduction for Tsunami. You use that, you get your stacks, use Tsunami, and then you switch back to Exsanguinate immediately. And it essentially turned Magic from this combat style where you could use, you know, you could camp Insight Fear for the extra criticals, you could use Exsanguinate for the little bit of extra basic attack damage, you could use Blood Barrage for healing, Shadow and Smoke Barrage for debuffs. Like, you could use all of these different spells with the old FSOA, and now the new FSOA, they're useless. Like, they're just straight up garbage, and the only spell you can use is Exsanguinate. And I definitely feel like that is an extremely huge downside to the new FSOA. But additionally to that, I mean, the new FSOA, it feels bad to use. Like, straight up, it is not fun to use. It feels really bad to use. It's boring when you compare it to the old FSOA. So yeah, I just think all around the new FSOA, it should just be reworked again at this point, and then kind of maybe meld together the benefits of the current one and the benefits of the old FSOA to make something that's not a pile of garbage. Because I really have nothing positive to say about this the current version of the staff. It's just really, really bad. And yeah, that's my rant about the FSOA. I really want this weapon to be back to its original form, or at least some semblance of its original form. Because personally speaking, I really liked the old FSOA. I found it fun and satisfying to use. And the new FSOA in comparison is completely garbage. It's not fun to use. It's not satisfying. And it's not even well designed. It's just a terrible weapon that was ruined by the developers, in my opinion, not understanding what was wrong with the original staff and then just ruining it. There are other things I could talk about with the staff. I could go on about the staff, but yeah, that's not gonna happen anymore. So anyway, some other maybe not so great things about the current state of combat are going to be the cost disparity in the cost of gear, or the disparity, I guess, in the cost of gear and the disparity in the effort to use those pieces of gear is ridiculous in the current state. So what I'm talking about here mainly is Necromancy versus other styles. And basically, Necromancy best in slot costs like 1.5 bill, whereas if you want to get an equally as strong set of range armor, it costs you like, you know, maybe 7.5 bill, but like best in slot range is like 11 bill to get. So, you know, it's just like the difference in cost for these gear sets is pretty extreme. So much so that, again, like no normal player, I feel like, would ever use anything other than Necromancy. And it's, you know, kind of the same problem with melee. Best in slot melee gear, I think, is like 6 or 7 bill. And again, that's so much more than the Necromancy gear that most people aren't going to use that. And then to add on top of that issue, not only do range and melee sets cost way more, but they are also extremely, you have to put in an extremely high amount of effort in order to optimally use them, again, in comparison to necromancy. So not only does it cost more, but it takes more effort to use those things. And I think those two issues combined basically make range and melee like almost unusable for, I would probably say, about 95% of players. And I don't really think that's a great state for combat to be in, where like essentially, even though necromancy still isn't like necessary for most players, it's what most players are going to be doing just because of how they're designed. And then obviously if we bring magic into the situation, it's garbage. So no one's going to be using that anyway. It's trash. You use that for like AFKing with the damage reduction, and that's about it. But yeah, I think that is a huge issue with the current state of combat, and I definitely want to know what other people think about like mainly the cost disparity as well as the effort disparity in these styles, and maybe what other people think about this and like how to fix it, or like just like other people's opinions on this topic. But yeah, I also would like to know here, because there's going to be a little discussion here at the end, I guess, but I'd also like to know kind of what you guys think about new content. Like, what kind of gear, what kind of upgrades, what kind of stuff could we see for magic, range, and melee from new content that could help bring it more in line with necromancy? Like, what do you guys think we could see? So that's going to be my first question to you. I guess I've asked some other questions, so maybe it's not the first one, but that's going to be one of the biggest questions to you here at the end. And then the second thing I'm going to talk about here, the second question, is going to be the reliance on critical strike buffs. I could make a whole video on this, so let me know if you want to see that. But I want to know what you guys think about the reliance of range and melee, and I guess magic as well, on the critical strike buffs. In my opinion, it seems like range needs a critical strike buff to function. Same thing with melee and same thing with magic. And this reliance on critical strike buffs is so important that you are almost forced to use off-style crit buffs in order to make, any of these combat styles function. So again, if you've seen my Raksha video, you know what I'm talking about, where it's like, step 1 of using range at Raksha, build a tsunami on a dummy. And it's just like, it's not a good state for combat to be in my opinion. Like, this reliance on these critical strike buffs is so strong that I feel like it's holding a lot of the combat styles back, because like, if I was trying to fix these combat styles, I don't know what I would do, to be honest, like, because of the critical strike buffs. Like, I don't know how you balance the combat styles around having infinite adrenaline, but I also don't know how you balance the combat styles around not having infinite adrenaline. And it doesn't really seem like there's any decent middle ground, especially because with range, you can't use Hydrix bolts, and with melee, you're effectively forced to use the Vestments of Havoc set, because, like, most people aren't going to switch to the Jaws of the Abyss. And that's where your adrenaline engine is. So yeah, I don't know. Let me know if you guys want to see a whole topic about the reliance on crit buffs, because I think it is a really, really big issue with the current state of combat. But yeah, if you guys made it this far in the video, definitely, leave a like for my ranting and stuff. And yeah, if you guys made it this far, thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.